morning, everyone. It's great to see you all here today. My name is Krithika. I'm a postdoc here at Stanford. I think we're all very well motivated now as to why we need to address the ACL injury epidemic. And today I'll be talking about how we're using smartphone-based measurements to assess injury risk in adolescent female athletes. So what is our big vision? We'd like to see biomechanically informed screening and intervention in the community. So we can imagine a pipeline where we collect some data using smartphone videos. This is something that most coaches will have access to. Perform some biomechanical analyses to understand loading of the ACL, and then use this assessment to provide personalized training and feedback, ultimately to reduce ACL injury incidents. Now today I'll be talking about our first study towards realizing this vision, in which we're developing a screening tool for use in the community. And we can divide this into three subparts. First, developing an ACL Injury Resilience Score, validating video-based measurements, and deploying this in the community. Now, the idea of creating a score based off of biomechanics in order to inform ACL injury risk assessments is not new. There are a number of landing and cutting biomechanics that have been associated with ACL injury risk. So we started by asking a cohort of experts, what are the limitations with current methods? And an emergent theme was that any effective assessment and score has to be multifactorial, accounting for metrics that capture changes across different joints and activities. In fact, trainable biomechanical risk factors have been identified through a number of prospective studies. And here you can see there's 5 different activities that have identified different metrics that span the trunk, the hip, the knee, the ankle. And so now our task is, how can we bring all of this together into a holistic score that's cohesive and still salient for practitioners? In order to do this, we started by collecting data from 26 adolescent female athletes who participate in ACL injury-prone sports like soccer, volleyball, basketball. And we had them perform these 5 activities: double leg drop jumps, single leg drop jumps, 90-degree run cuts and drop cuts, and single leg squats. These are all activities that we've seen in the literature. And so from each of these activities, we can pull out those biomechanical risk factors and start to construct our score. So first, we started by characterizing what does it look like if someone goes on to get an injury. Well, we can look at literature data to characterize this distribution. And then we can look at our study sample to understand what might be a healthy distribution or some group that has never been injured. Now, for a new athlete, we can then define a subject-specific Z-score that puts them on the spectrum from more injury-prone to more injury-resilient. And now we can do this for all of those metrics, combine them together to create an ACL injury or AIR score that assesses movement quality across activities. For example, with a single leg drop jump, someone with a low AIR score might have a higher trunk lean as well as a relatively stiff landing, whereas someone with a high AIR score is more stacked above their landing foot with their limb in alignment. Now, all of this has been developed using a set of metrics that we captured using in-lab measurements. But how do we actually take this out to the field? And this brings us to OpenCap, an open source tool that was developed by our lab that generates musculoskeletal models from smartphone videos. Now, this tool has been used and validated primarily in adults performing tasks like walking and running. So our first step is to figure out, does this actually work for our population of female adolescent athletes and for our activity sets? So for each of those trials that we collected, we could create a musculoskeletal simulation of the motion and then compare how these biomechanical metrics that go into the AIR score compare between the reference, which is the measurements that we get from motion capture in the lab, traditional optical motion capture, versus OpenCap, which is coming from the smartphone videos. So here we're looking at the knee flexion angle during the landing phase of a single leg drop jump, and we see that there's relatively low errors and high correspondence between the 2 measurements of knee flexion. We can do this as well with the frontal plane, looking at the trunk lean. Although the errors are slightly higher, we still see pretty strong correlation between the 2 measurements. So now we can take these time series data and extract those point metrics that have been identified in prospective studies and put them into an air score. So we can compare an open cap derived air score with a motion capture derived air score, and we observe that there's relatively, again, high correspondence between the two. And this is encouraging because this tells us that we can use smartphone-based assessments to understand movement quality outside of the lab. All right, so there we have a score. We've done some progress towards moving it out, being able to capture it with smartphone videos with accessible tools, but there are still a few more considerations to actually have this deployable. For example, what is the sensitivity of the air score to athletic playing surfaces? I encourage you to check out Caitlin's poster later today, but our initial results suggest that there are no significant differences in air scores across surfaces. In order for this to be adopted, we also need the assessments to be rapid. And so we found that by adding a few more metrics per activity, we can actually collapse this assessment to just 2 activities. There are a number of other considerations like footwear that Alex will talk about later. And so we're really excited to get this tool out to start to understand and actually investigate these factors in more realistic environments. So coming back to our big vision now, we have developed a screening tool for use in the community. We have some validation of being able to capture those biomechanics effectively. But now the question is, what is an air score at which we need to provide some intervention, and what is an air score that is injury resilient? So to answer this question, we've launched a large-scale prospective study, and we are actively recruiting adolescent athletes. And so we're hopeful that the information from this study will provide us with some insights into how to inform and design new training interventions like those Greg has conducted, our next speaker. So we are excited to collaborate with all of you to study these questions further. With that, I'll thank all of our team members, our funding sources, and our participants. Thank you.